Colorado Territory, 1876. Katherine Evans clutched her woolen shawl tighter against the bitter November wind that swept across her struggling homestead. The distant peaks of the San Juan Mountains were already crowned with snow, an early winter threatening what little remained of her hope. 3 years a widow, and still the ache of Thomas's absence clung to her like the dust that never seemed to wash from her hands. "Not today," she whispered to the darkening sky as she secured the barn door. "You'll not take my livestock too." At 30 years old, Katherine, Kate to the few who knew her well, had little left besides 6 acres of rocky soil, 3 dairy cows, a tired mule, and a small cabin that leaked when the rains came heavy. The silver mining boom had brought fortune seekers to these parts, but the Evans claim had yielded nothing but heartbreak and debt. She was halfway to the cabin when she heard it, a groan carried on the wind, so faint she might have imagined it. Kate froze, listening. There it was again, unmistakably human. She reached for the rifle she kept strapped to the well pump, her heart pounding. "Who's there?" she called, her voice steady despite her fear. No response came, but another groan, weaker this time. Kate followed the sound, moving cautiously toward the creek that marked her property's edge. In the fading light, she nearly missed the crumpled form half hidden among the willows. A man, face down, his coat darkened with what could only be blood. "Lord Almighty," she breathed, kneeling beside him. The stranger was alive, but barely. A gunshot wound marred his shoulder, and dried blood caked his temple where something, or someone, had struck him hard. Kate rolled him gently, revealing a face weathered by sun and hardship, but handsome still beneath several days' growth of beard. He couldn't be much older than her own 30 years. "Can you hear me?" she asked, pressing fingers to his neck to find a weak pulse. His eyelids fluttered, revealing eyes blue as a summer sky. "Water," he managed, his voice a broken whisper. "Hold on," Kate said. "I'll get help." His hand shot out with surprising strength, grasping her wrist. "No, Sheriff," he rasped. "Please." In that moment, looking into those desperate blue eyes, Katherine Evans made a decision that would forever alter the course of her life. Against all good sense, she would help this stranger, this man running from something or someone, and ask questions later. "I can't carry you," she told him, "but I can bring my mule." By the time she had dragged the wounded stranger into her cabin, night had fallen completely, and Kate was shaking with exhaustion. She managed to get him onto her bed, the only one in the small cabin, and cut away his bloodied shirt to examine the wound. "You're lucky," she muttered, cleaning the angry hole in his shoulder. Bullet went clean through. The man hissed in pain but remained conscious. "Quincy," he said suddenly. "Quincy Lawson. Katherine Evans," she replied, not looking up from her work. "Most folks call me Kate." "Why are you helping me, Mrs. Evans?" His voice was clearer now, deep and resonant despite his weakness. Kate paused, needle poised above the wound she was preparing to suture. "Because there was a time when no one helped me," she said simply, "and I swore I'd never be that person." Something flickered in Quincy Lawson's eyes, surprise, perhaps, or recognition of a kindred spirit. "They'll come looking," he warned. "Who?" "Men who want me dead." His eyes drifted closed. "Bradford and his gang." Kate's hand stilled. Everyone in 3 counties knew of Victor Bradford and his outlaws. They'd robbed the Silverton Bank 2 months prior, killing a teller in the process. "Are you one of them?" she asked, voice hardening. "No," Quincy whispered. "I'm the one who's going to stop them." Before Kate could question him further, he slipped into unconsciousness, leaving her with a dangerous stranger in her bed and 1,000 unanswered questions swirling in her mind. Outside, the wind picked up, howling around the cabin's corners like a warning. For 3 days, Quincy Lawson burned with fever, occasionally awakening to take sips of water or broth from Kate's steady hand. In his delirium, he spoke of things that made little sense. A valley of green, horses running free, and someone named Sarah who had been taken from him. On the 4th morning, Kate returned from milking the cows to find him sitting upright, lucid for the first time since she dragged him from the creek bed. "You saved my life," he said simply. Kate set down her milk pail. "You're not out of danger yet. I meant what I said before. About Bradford." Quincy's eyes held hers. "I'm not an outlaw, Mrs. Evans. I'm a Pinkerton agent." Kate leaned against the rough-hewn table, studying him. His fever had broken, leaving him pale but clear-eyed. "Prove it." With effort, Quincy reached for his discarded coat, which Kate had hung near the fireplace to dry. From an inner pocket, he withdrew a silver badge and official-looking papers. "I've been tracking Bradford's gang for 6 months," he explained as Kate examined his credentials. "They've hit banks and trains from Denver to Santa Fe. 2 weeks ago, I got close, too close. They ambushed me near Durango. And you've been running ever since," Kate finished, returning his badge. Quincy nodded. "I had a horse, but they shot it out from under me. I've been on foot, hiding during the day, traveling at night. I thought I'd lost them until 2 days before you found me." Kate moved to the cabin's single window, gazing out at her barren fields. "So they could be nearby. If they knew I survived, yes." A chill that had nothing to do with the November cold settled in Kate's bones. "Mr. Lawson, I have little enough as it is. I can't afford to be caught harboring a man that killers are hunting." "I understand." Quincy attempted to stand, but faltered, gripping the bedpost for support. "I'll be gone by nightfall." Kate turned to find him swaying, his face ashen. Without thinking, she crossed the room and steadied him with a hand on his unwounded arm. "Don't be foolish. You can barely stand." Something passed between them then, a current of understanding, perhaps, or recognition of shared stubbornness. Up close, Kate noted the small lines at the corners of his eyes, the determined set of his jaw. "One more day," she conceded. "Then we'll see." 1 day stretched to 3, then a week. Quincy's strength returned gradually, and Kate found herself with an unexpected farmhand. Despite her protests, he insisted on earning his keep. Mending her leaky roof, chopping firewood that would last well into winter, and fixing the broken wheel on her cart. "You don't owe me this," Kate said one evening as they shared a simple supper of rabbit stew. Quincy looked up from his bowl. "Maybe I'm not doing it because I owe you." "Then why?" His gaze lingered on her face, making her suddenly aware of how long it had been since she'd had a man's eyes on her with anything like interest. "Because you're alone, and so am I. And sometimes, Mrs. Evans, being alone is the hardest fight of all." Kate's throat tightened unexpectedly. "I've managed." "You have," he agreed. "Admirably. But there's a difference between surviving and living." His words struck a chord that resonated deep within her, in places Kate had thought long since silenced by grief and struggle. She stood abruptly, gathering their empty bowls. "Will you tell me about your husband?" Quincy asked quietly. Kate paused, her back to him. "Thomas came west with dreams of silver. We both did. Fool's dreams, as it turned out." She set the bowls in a basin of water. "The mine collapsed in 73. They recovered his body, which is more than some widows get." "I'm sorry." She turned to face him. "What about you? You mentioned someone named Sarah in your fever." Pain flashed across Quincy's face. "My sister. Bradford's men took her during a stagecoach robbery last year. She was traveling to Denver to be married." His hands clenched into fists on the table. "That's why I joined the Pinkertons. To find her. And have you?" Quincy's eyes met hers, haunted by a grief Kate recognized all too well. "No, but I've tracked down 3 of the 5 men responsible. Bradford and his right-hand man, Silas Mercer, are the last." Outside, snow began to fall, delicate flakes illuminated by the cabin's lantern light. They sat in silence for a long moment, 2 souls bound by loss and determination. "You should leave soon," Kate said at last. "Not because I want you to, but because staying puts us both in danger." Quincy nodded slowly. "I'll go in the morning." A sharp knock at the door shattered the quiet, making them both jump. Kate's hand flew to her throat in alarm. "Mrs. Evans?" called a familiar voice. "It's Sheriff Miller. Need a word." Kate and Quincy exchanged panicked glances. There was nowhere for him to hide in the tiny cabin, nowhere except under the bed or in the root cellar access through a trapdoor in the floor. "Just a moment," Kate called, frantically gesturing for Quincy to use the cellar. She smoothed her apron and hair before opening the door to find Sheriff Miller stamping snow from his boots on her porch. At 55, Miller was a decent lawman with a fondness for whiskey and a soft spot for Kate since her husband's death. "Evening, Sheriff. What brings you out in this weather?" Miller removed his hat, revealing thinning gray hair. "Sorry to disturb you so late, Mrs. Evans. Mind if I come in? Getting mighty cold out here." Kate stepped aside reluctantly. "Of course." The sheriff's keen eyes scanned the small cabin, noting the 2 bowls in the washing basin, the extra chair pulled up to the table. Kate held her breath, praying the trapdoor wasn't visible from where he stood. "Been meaning to check on you," Miller said, "especially with what's been happening." "What's that?" Kate asked, striving for casual interest. Miller settled his bulk into a chair with a weary sigh. "Had word from the marshal in Durango. Seems Bradford and his gang were spotted north of here, heading this way. They're hunting a lawman, apparently." He fixed Kate with a serious look. "I'm making rounds, warning folks to be vigilant. These are dangerous men." Kate clutched the back of a chair, hoping the sheriff would attribute her pallor to fear rather than guilt. "I appreciate the warning. Been any strangers around your property lately? Anyone suspicious?" She shook her head, the lie bitter on her tongue. "No one comes this way much, Sheriff. You know that." Miller grunted, seemingly satisfied. "Well, keep that rifle of yours loaded, just the same." He rose to leave, then hesitated. "You know, Mrs. Evans, it ain't right. A woman alone out here. My sister's boy needs a wife. Good lad. Works the mercantile in Silverton." Kate forced a smile. "That's kind, but I'm not looking to remarry." The sheriff shrugged. "Can't blame a man for trying. My sister worries about you almost as much as I do." His gaze fell on the mended roof beam. "Someone help you with that?" Kate's heart skipped. "Mr. Hollister from up the way. In exchange for butter through winter." It was another lie, and from Miller's expression, Kate wasn't certain he believed it. But he merely nodded, replacing his hat. "Well, bolt your door after me. And if you see or hear anything unusual, fire 3 shots. I'll have men listening." The moment the sheriff's footsteps faded, Kate rushed to the trapdoor. "Quincy," she whispered urgently. He emerged, dust clinging to his clothes. "Bradford's closing in," he said grimly. "You have to leave tonight," Kate insisted. "If they find you here, if I leave now, I'll be leading them straight back to your door," Quincy countered. "Bradford doesn't leave witnesses, Kate. Anyone who's seen me will be in danger." The use of her first name, spoken with such concern, stopped her protest cold. He was right, and they both knew it. If Bradford's gang learned she had sheltered a Pinkerton agent, her life would be forfeit. "What are you suggesting?" she asked. Quincy moved to the window, peering out into the snowy night. "I need to face them, but on my terms. Not theirs." He turned back to her, his expression resolute. "I have an idea, but I'll need your help." As the snow continued to fall, blanketing the world in white silence, Kate listened to Quincy's plan, a dangerous gambit that could cost them both everything. By dawn, they would either be free of Bradford's shadow, or they would not live to see another sunset. And in that moment, with the specter of death looming so near, Katherine Evans realized something that terrified her more than any outlaw ever could. She was falling in love with Quincy Lawson. The trap was set by daybreak. Kate drove her cart into Timber Creek, the nearest settlement. Little more than a general store, a saloon, and a handful of cabins clustered around a stagecoach stop. With a convincing display of nervous energy, she spread word that a wounded man had stumbled onto her property in the night, raving about outlaws and treasure hidden in the abandoned Blackwell mine. "I sent him on his way," she told Mrs. Peterson at the general store, her voice pitched just loud enough to be overheard by the 2 rough-looking strangers lounging near the pot-bellied stove. "Told him I wanted no part of his troubles." "You did right," Mrs. Peterson assured her, wrapping Kate's purchases in brown paper. A woman alone can't be too careful. Kate noted the strangers exchanging glances. One nudged the other and jerked his head toward the door. Within minutes, they had mounted their horses and ridden north, in the direction of the abandoned mine. Heart pounding, Kate completed her errands with deliberate slowness, then started the journey back to her homestead. A mile outside of town, Quincy stepped from the trees, leading a horse he'd purchased from a farmer with some of the money he'd managed to keep hidden in his boot. "They took the bait," Kate said, pulling the cart to a halt. Quincy's expression was grim as he mounted. "2 of them. That means at least 3 more, including Bradford." "Be careful," Kate urged. "If they suspect a trap, I'll be back before sundown," Quincy promised, his eyes lingering on her face. "If I'm not, you will be," Kate said firmly, refusing to consider the alternative. With a nod, Quincy turned his horse toward the foothills where the abandoned Blackwell mine had once promised fortune to men like her Thomas. Kate watched until he disappeared from sight, then snapped the reins to urge her mule forward. She had her own preparations to make. The hours crawled by like years. Kate cleaned her rifle, positioned it near the window, and then paced the small cabin, jumping at every sound. By mid-afternoon, dark clouds had gathered, threatening more snow. She thought of Quincy, possibly wounded or worse, and of the outlaw gang that might even now be closing in on her isolated homestead. A sound outside stopped her cold, the unmistakable crunch of approaching hoofbeats. Kate grabbed her rifle and moved to the window, peering cautiously around the edge of the curtain. 3 riders approached, their faces obscured by scarves against the cold. The one in the lead was tall and broad-shouldered, his black coat making him seem like a shadow come to life. Bradford, she guessed, or perhaps his lieutenant, Mercer. Kate positioned herself by the door, rifle ready. According to Quincy's plan, she was to act surprised and frightened, to claim no knowledge of the Pinkerton beyond their brief encounter the night before. But as the riders drew nearer, Kate realized with growing horror that Quincy was nowhere to be seen. Something had gone wrong. The lead rider dismounted and approached the cabin. "Mrs. Evans," he called, his voice muffled by the scarf. "Need a word with you, ma'am." Kate gripped her rifle tighter. "What do you want?" "Information about a man you helped. A wounded man. I already told him to move on." Kate called through the door. "I want no trouble here." The man chuckled, a sound that sent ice through Kate's veins. "Oh, I think it's too late for that, Mrs. Evans. You see, we found your friend at the mine. He was most informative before he passed." Kate's blood ran cold. "Quincy dead?" It couldn't be. She fought to keep her voice steady. "I don't know what you're talking about." "I think you do," the man said, his tone hardening. "Open the door, or we'll open it for you." Kate raised her rifle, aiming at the door. "I have a gun, and I know how to use it. Leave my property now." For a moment, there was silence. Then, without warning, something crashed through the cabin's window. Kate whirled to see a burning torch land on her wooden floor, flames instantly licking at the dry boards. "Last chance, Mrs. Evans," called the outlaw. "Come out, or burn." Choking on rapidly spreading smoke, Kate had no choice. She flung open the door and stepped onto the porch, rifle still clutched in her hands. The 3 men had formed a semicircle before her cabin. The leader pulled down his scarf, revealing a face bisected by a jagged scar. "Victor Bradford," he introduced himself with a mocking bow. "And you've been harboring a man I very much want to kill." "He's gone," Kate said defiantly, raising her rifle. "And you'll not find him through me." Bradford smiled, showing tobacco-stained teeth. "Actually, Mrs. Evans, I believe he'll find us." He nodded to one of his men, who produced a length of rope. "You're the bait now." Before Kate could squeeze the trigger, a shot rang out from the direction of the barn. One of Bradford's men cried out and toppled from his horse, clutching his shoulder. A second shot followed immediately, striking the dirt at Bradford's feet. "Let her go, Bradford." Quincy's voice carried across the yard. "It's me you want." Bradford's face contorted with rage. "Lawson, show yourself. Let Mrs. Evans walk away, and I will." Bradford glanced at Kate, then at his wounded man, calculating his odds. With a snarl, he drew his pistol and seized Kate, pressing the barrel to her temple. "Come out now, Lawson, or I'll put a bullet in her pretty head," he shouted. For a terrible moment, nothing happened. Then Quincy emerged from the shadows of the barn, his own weapon trained on Bradford. "You're surrounded, Bradford," Quincy said calmly. "Sheriff Miller and his deputies are positioned in the trees. Your men at the mine are already in custody." Bradford's grip on Kate tightened. "You're bluffing." "Am I?" "Think carefully, Victor. This can end with just you in prison, or with you in a pine box. Your choice." Kate could feel Bradford's uncertainty in the trembling of the gun at her temple. His remaining henchman was looking nervously toward the tree line, clearly spooked by the possibility of hidden lawmen. "I want safe passage," Bradford demanded. "The woman comes with me as insurance." Quincy took a step closer. "That's not going to happen. Then she dies first," Bradford roared. In that instant, Kate saw her chance. She drove her elbow backward with all her might, connecting with Bradford's stomach. As he doubled over, gasping, she tore away from his grasp and threw herself to the ground. Gunfire erupted. When Kate looked up, Bradford was on his knees, blood blooming across his chest. His remaining man had thrown down his weapon and raised his hands. And Quincy was rushing toward her, his face a mask of concern. "Kate, are you hurt?" She shook her head, struggling to her feet as Quincy reached her side. My cabin. They both turned to see flames engulfing the small structure that had been her home for 5 years. Everything she owned was inside. Thomas's few belongings, her mother's Bible, the quilt she'd brought from Pennsylvania. All of it, burning. I'm sorry, Quincy said softly, his arm going around her shoulders. Kate watched her past disappear in smoke and flame. At least we're alive, she whispered. From the trees emerged not Sheriff Miller and his deputies, but a single figure, a young woman with dark hair and Quincy's blue eyes. Sarah? Quincy breathed, disbelieving. The woman broke into a run. Quincy. Kate stepped back as brother and sister embraced, tears streaming down both their faces. Over Sarah's shoulder, Quincy's eyes found Kate's, filled with wonder and gratitude and something deeper that made her heart skip. How? He asked his sister when they finally separated. I escaped 2 months ago, Sarah explained. I've been searching for you ever since. When I heard about a Pinkerton asking questions about Bradford near Durango, I knew it had to be you. She glanced at Bradford's still form. I found his camp yesterday. I heard them planning to ambush you at the mine. So you warned Quincy, Kate guessed. Sarah nodded. Just in time. She turned to Kate with a warm smile. My brother told me what you did for him, how you saved his life. Before Kate could respond, the sound of approaching horses heralded the actual arrival of Sheriff Miller and several deputies. They took in the scene. The burning cabin, the dead and captured outlaws, the reunited siblings, and Katherine Evans standing amid the chaos with soot on her face and determination in her eyes. As Miller and his men secured the prisoner and Bradford's body, Quincy approached Kate again, taking her hands in his. You've lost everything because of me, he said, his voice thick with regret. Kate looked at the smoldering ruins of her cabin, then back at Quincy. Not everything, she said softly. Quincy's grip on her hands tightened. I have to go to Denver, he told her. To complete my report, to see Sarah safely to her fiancé. He hesitated, then added with quiet intensity, but I'll come back, Kate, if you'll have me. Behind him, the sun was setting, painting the snow-dusted mountains in shades of gold and rose. Kate thought of her years of struggle, of loneliness, of merely surviving. And she thought of Quincy Lawson, who had crashed into her life like a falling star and changed everything. I'll be here, she promised. Spring, 1877. Katherine Evans stood on the crest of a hill, gazing out over the Lawson Valley. Below her, the Snake River wound like a silver ribbon through meadows already lush with new grass. In the distance, a herd of horses, Quincy's pride and joy, grazed peacefully beneath a sky so vast and blue it seemed to go on forever. For months had passed since the day her cabin burned. For months since Quincy had ridden away with his sister, promising to return. She had not expected what happened next. The letter that arrived 2 weeks later, containing a deed to a sprawling ranch in Wyoming territory and a simple question. Will you make a new beginning with me? She had come as soon as the mountain passes cleared, traveling by stagecoach and then by wagon, uncertain what awaited her. Quincy had met her at the territorial border, his face alight with joy and nervous anticipation. He had brought her here, to this valley that had been in his family for generations, a place he had spoken of during his fever dreams. Do you like it? Quincy asked now, coming to stand beside her on the hilltop. Kate turned to him. This man who had transformed her life in ways she never could have imagined. It's the most beautiful place I've ever seen. Quincy's expression softened as he took her hand. In the weeks since her arrival, they had come to know each other truly, not as a desperate wounded man and his reluctant savior, but as two people finding their way towards something neither had expected to discover again. Love, slowly blooming like the wildflowers that now carpeted the valley floor. I want to build something here, Quincy said, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. Something lasting. The Pinkertons have offered me a permanent position in these territories, but I'm going to decline. Kate looked at him in surprise. But your work was about finding Sarah and bringing Bradford to justice, he finished. Both accomplished. Now I want something different. His blue eyes held hers intently. I want to raise horses and cattle. I want to build a home large enough for a family. I want to wake every morning to this view, and to you beside me. The wind caught Kate's hair, lifting it around her face as she absorbed his words. Are you asking me to marry you, Quincy Lawson? I suppose I am, he replied with a smile that reached all the way to his eyes. though perhaps not very eloquently. Kate laughed, a sound of pure joy that echoed across the valley. I don't need eloquence. I just need you. Quincy drew her into his arms, his expression growing serious. When I was lying wounded by that creek, I thought I was going to die. Then an angel with auburn hair and the courage of a lioness found me. His hand caressed her cheek. You saved more than my life that day, Kate. You saved my soul. Kate's eyes filled with tears as Quincy lowered his lips to hers. In that kiss was a promise of all that lay ahead. A home built with love, children's laughter, years of partnership and passion. As a struggling widow, she had saved a wounded stranger. Now he had returned to make her queen of his valley, and together they would create a dynasty born of courage and devotion. When they finally parted, breathless and smiling, Kate looked out once more over the land that would be their legacy. The setting sun gilded the landscape, turning ordinary grass and trees into something magical. Welcome home, Katherine Lawson, Quincy whispered against her hair. And as night fell over Lawson Valley, Kate knew with absolute certainty that some journeys begin exactly when and where they're meant to, even at a rocky creek bed in Colorado, with a wounded stranger who would one day become her heart's true destination.